So similar to like slowly moving the fabric through the machine, I'm doing the same thing. And then I stopped a little above the line, but if I wanted to, I could pull that out. So say I just wanted it up to that line. So that's essentially, we did it.
And when you pull it out, it cuts
When you
on
pull,
its own.
yes, it does cut on its own because this is a cut machine, which is great. At the end, you can check out the other side. So essentially, when you're tufting, say we wanted to do all this color, you would just want to make sure our lines are like this kind of far apart. I always say start that far, and then you can go back if it needs more. You can go back and do dashes in between. If you do really close together, then your yarn is going to start to kind of become a sculptural thing on the back, and then that's when you get holes. So I'll show like an example on this side of like really close. This is like a little too close. If you keep doing that, it's going to make a hole, and you're going to have way too much yarn on the other side. What we recommend is going these distances. You want to see some of the cloth in between. And even here's a little, maybe it's a little too far apart. I just put a little dash in between. And you can always check the back and feel it and see if it feels like, is this consistent or is there kind of some soft spots in it, you know? As you're going, you can feel free to trim these, then you don't have to do it later, which is nice. So basically that's how you want to kind of fill up a section. It's much easier to tuft up like this as opposed to tufting like this. You can, but again, you can see my stitches are a little different shaped because it's much harder for me to control the machine that way. As you get more advanced with the machine though, then you can start to do like back and forth kind of vibe there, or you can do back and forth here. It's just much easier when you're beginning to stick it in and go up as opposed to going down or other things like that. So that's what we recommend. So yeah, you can cross over yarn. I would say maybe once. I would limit that though, because the more yarn you put in, the more likely you're going to get a hole. So yeah, any questions on cut? It's much easier to use, more forgiving. It's great. But we do want you to try out both machines, because sometimes you might be like, oh my god, I love loop so much more. So we're going to show that one now. And again, the loop machine has this belt here. It's this like plastic or rubber, I guess, black belt. So that's how I tell the difference. And then it has that different part at the top we were talking about. Oops. This one has a, oh, I'm in the wrong part. So we just plug them in. And then again, it has the same turning on and off switch. This one sounds a little different though. And then you can still adjust the speed down here. So we're gonna put it at the lowest and I'll turn it back off. Very similar setup of how we thread it here under your arm. You can also sit down. Sometimes that helps. You thread it through the circles here.
Sorry, would you say they're the same? They have the same speed, or one is slower than the other one?
I would say the same speed, yeah. It's very similar, if not the same. And
Do
then
you always have to have 2 pieces of yarn in?
that's what we recommend. If you do one, you'll see that one, you'll have to tuft more because it's not enough yarn on the other side to make a whole carpet. It's not going to be as thick. And 2, the machine doesn't like it as much. I don't know where my thread went. So the machine will want to add more, and it will kind of, it won't be as consistent here when you do it. So, you know, if you're like, oh, it doesn't seem like it's enough, and maybe double check you have 2. If you're doing different kinds of yarn, so say you're doing like a really thin yarn, you might need to put more of that yarn in. So essentially you want to kind of equal the same amount of like yarn density per like area kind of thing. So we find with our wool yarn, 2 is like the best optimal kind of amount for this area and for this kind of tufting. So if you were to buy yarn at like, you know, the yarn store, you would just want to make sure that it's like, is it as thick as this or do you need to add more of it, that kind of vibe. The yarn that we have is 100% wool, and it's made for rugs too, which is nice. So it's more durable. It's going to last you longer, especially if you're thinking about setting up a shop. You want customers to have like, you know, good kind of quality materials that they're getting in their products. So yeah, the loop machine has like this tube at the end. So again, you're going to take the tiny part of your threader and it goes up the tube. This one might be a little too big. If you need to get other, I need a couple more here tonight. And sometimes you kind of have to like wiggle with it. And you stick it up there, and then you put the yarn through. And then make sure your yarn is in here. Oopsie. This is the hardest part. It's very tiny. Okay, I think I got them all. And then you pull it through. And my yarn kind of got ragged on here. So the loop you're gonna have to cut as you go. That one I could just pull back when I was done. This one you have to cut as you go. So we're all ready to go. We got our yarn coming up from over here. I'm gonna do maybe loop this area now. Oh, let's turn it on. And then so if I try to pull away, I can't. So I have to cut it. And then you turn it. So then I could go through and fill in this area. Say maybe I was like, oh, I want to change this to a loop instead. I could like rip these out. I'll just do a section. And then I normally just go through my fingernail, like kind of put the grid back together so you don't have all these holes. And then you can tuck back into this. If you do this like more than 2 times, you're going to get a hole because it's going to get stretched out after a while. So I'd only recommend doing that, you know, minimally. And then I can tuck back into here. If I wanted to, I could keep going. I could like go over once. Again, the more you tucked over, even see it was popping out. It didn't like that. It was like too much yarn in one area. And then I can try and do the circle too. Circles we suggest doing like short little bursts. You could do like this, and then you could do here, and then you could do here. And this gives you more control so you can do like correctly match your design. Because it's really hard in one go to make it perfect. Especially as you get to the top. So that would be like part of your circle. For this though, instead of going back in a circle, you could do that, but it's easier to just fill it in with lines like this. So that's how I would suggest doing that. If you don't want to do the circle, you could, you know, pull that out. Say you don't want to do that. You want to make it super easy for yourself. You could just fill in these with like little bursts. It's going to take a little longer because you're doing a loop, but then it will look super nice on the other side. And see, I have like the scissors in my other hand, which makes it a little easier. You can have the scissors around your neck if you want. And then here I went above, I'm just going to pull it out and then cut it. So then I'm slowly filling that up. Any questions? I think I went through everything. Let's see. Spacing, increase.
Designs better.
Yes. As you can see, my lines are pretty consistent overall. This one's a little loose. If you're going too fast, the machine doesn't like that. You can see that it was kind of ripping weird, and my lines are very spread far apart. That's how you know, okay, I'm going too fast. If you're going too slow, let's show that now. The yarn started popping up because it was like, hey, there's too much in here. And it's very, very tight. You kind of want them to be consistent like this. So that's another thing to think about. Normally,
speed, like how quickly you're moving your.
yeah, how quickly you're moving and how much you're putting on the trigger too. So you kind of want to, the machine itself is going pretty consistent when you pull on the trigger, so you want to consistently like gently glide it up. And it will want to go up through the grid really easily too. Even that, some of it was a little fast. That's why I bumped out. But yeah, cool. If that's, how do you
correct that if you bump out?
You could just pull this out and cut it and do it again. That's one way to do it.
You go over it again.
You could go over it again. Again, though, you wouldn't want to go the full line. You would just want to do that little section you missed. I think at this rate, if it's the first one through the line, it's better to pull it out.
Okay.
Like here, I would just completely pull that out and redo it. But yeah.
Can you repeat what the spacing guidelines like?
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna pull this out. Yeah, I generally say, I don't know what the distance is here. I generally say this much.
Okay, thank you.
And I can come around and look at designs too. I normally say simplify. You know, some people have like, oh, I want to do an outline. Maybe it's best to just do one tufted line of that color and not fill this in. Maybe, I'm trying to think of what else we ran into.
What does that mean?
I think people underestimate how much color will come through with like 2 lines. So, like, we had a person on the Tuesday workshop that like did 2 tufted lines and thought the outline was too thick. So if you're outlining something, like we recommend doing the details first and like seeing what that looks like, and if you want to add more, you can. But it's pretty, like, you guys want to come on the other side. I don't want to rush out if you're not comfortable, but it's a pretty substantial like weight of line that ends up coming through.
So if you're wanting to outline something, like this is maybe a great example too. This is probably just one line, this white here.
Oh, that's just.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
You
my
went to just
thinking.
doing the outline first and then filling
It might be 2.
We said, yeah, just detail in smaller areas first. People are usually happier with, 'cause it's harder to go see sort of what you're doing when you're trying to go into a smaller space after you've done the large space. So that way, like, when you do your details, you can decide if you want those to grow before filling it in. If that makes sense.
Cool. Yay, now you can get started. We'll walk around and help.
That's fun. You got a lot up here. I'm sorry. I want to help.
Yeah, but you can help after you give them the chance to try.
I know, but I'm just hoping to get it tight.
It looks like nice turf. Yours better than mine.
You see what I said?
What?
I use this. See? When I do it, I use this right here as my guide to put on there.
Yeah, but you're doing a good amount of pressure and everything. I'm over here struggling. Don't get me in it.
Coming out nice.